What if the moment you felt déjà vu wasn't a glitch in your memory, but a crack in how reality actually works? What if those impossible synchronicities, the number that keeps appearing, the song that plays at the exact second you think of someone, the sense that time briefly stretched or collapsed, weren't coincidences at all? And what if, when reality felt like it was glitching, you weren't losing your grip, you were gaining perception? If you've experienced real déjà vu, the kind that hits your chest before your mind can explain it, you're not crazy. If you've noticed synchronicities so precise they feel scripted, you're not imagining things. If you've felt moments where time slowed, sped up, or folded in on itself, you're not broken. You may be perceiving something most people never stop long enough to notice. And here's the part no one tells you. People who sense these things often feel isolated, not socially, existentially, like you're operating on a different frequency, surrounded by others who don't hear the signal at all. That loneliness isn't a flaw, it's feedback. Modern science has a name for part of this conversation: quantum consciousness. And it sits right at the edge where physics, neuroscience, and human experience collide. At the smallest scales of reality, the universe doesn't behave like a solid machine. It behaves like a field of probabilities. A quantum field where outcomes don't exist until something interacts with them, observes them, participates. That's not philosophy, that's physics. The observer effect isn't a metaphor. In controlled experiments, observation changes outcomes. Measurement alters behavior. Reality responds. And once you really sit with that fact, a disturbing question emerges. If observation helps shape reality at the quantum level, what role does human awareness actually play? This is where the mainstream story gets uncomfortable. Because the deeper researchers went, the more the implications started sounding, in their own words, too metaphysical. One paper exploring non-local aspects of consciousness was reportedly rejected over a dozen times, not for errors, not for bad math, but because it challenged the assumption that reality exists independent of perception. That's not conspiracy. That's how institutions react when ideas threaten the frame they rely on. Here's what matters to you. Your subconscious mind doesn't just react to reality, it filters it. Your beliefs, your attention, your emotional patterns influence what you notice, what you reinforce, what becomes real enough to shape your life. This is why two people can live in the same city, the same year, the same events, and experience entirely different worlds. You may have felt this during a spiritual awakening, even if you never used that word. A moment when old explanations stopped working, when your sense of self loosened, when the question wasn't, what do I believe? But why does reality feel thinner than it used to? People going through this often notice changes in vibration and frequency, not as mystical buzzwords, but as lived experience. Your tolerance for noise drops. Your sensitivity increases. You start noticing patterns that were always there, hidden beneath habit and distraction, a hidden reality running quietly underneath the surface. And here's the most unsettling part. Quantum physics doesn't describe a single fixed outcome universe. It describes multiple potential outcomes existing simultaneously until interaction locks one in. That alone raises a question no one can fully answer yet. What happens to the possibilities that aren't chosen? This video isn't here to give you a neat answer. It's here to show you why the question exists at all. If you've ever felt like your life could have gone another way, not emotionally, but structurally, stay with me. If you've sensed that reality is participatory, not passive, stay with me. If you've felt alone because your mind keeps asking questions others avoid, you're exactly who this is for. This isn't for everyone, but if you're still here, the next part is where things start to get uncomfortable in the best possible way. If you're still watching, don't treat this as entertainment. Subscribe now. This channel exists to connect science, quantum consciousness, and the parts of reality most people feel, but never learn how to explain. In the early 1980s, while the public was focused on Cold War politics and nuclear threats, a very different kind of research was quietly unfolding behind classified doors. In 1983, the U.S. intelligence community analyzed a series of consciousness studies that had nothing to do with weapons or surveillance in the traditional sense. These projects focused on altered perception, non-linear awareness, and how human consciousness behaves when the normal structure of reality begins to dissolve. Not hypothetically, experimentally, participants described something deeply unsettling. They didn't report hallucinations. They reported continuity breaks, moments where time felt misaligned, decisions that felt already lived, a sensation that events were familiar before they occurred. Many used the same words, independently of each other. It felt like I shifted into a different version of my life. Psychologists today recognize these experiences as real cognitive phenomena, especially under conditions of stress, trauma, deep introspection, or expanded awareness. The brain does not simply record reality, it actively constructs it. And when that construction destabilizes, the sense of a single linear world begins to fracture. What disturbed researchers wasn't the strangeness of the reports, it was their consistency. People with no connection to one another described the same internal sensations: intense déjà vu, hyper-meaningful coincidences, time distortion, and a quiet certainty that something fundamental had changed. Not emotionally, structurally, as if the background code of reality had been altered, and they were the only ones who noticed. This is where quantum physics quietly enters the conversation. At the quantum level, reality does not exist as solid objects moving through time. It exists as probability fields, waves of potential that only become definite through interaction. Observation changes outcomes. Measurement alters behavior. This is the observer effect, and it is not philosophical speculation. It is experimentally verified physics. If matter itself responds to observation, then consciousness is not a passive bystander. It is part of the equation, and that raises an uncomfortable implication. If consciousness participates in reality creation, then shifts in perception may feel like shifts in reality itself. Not because the world is imaginary, but because it is relational. This is why people who experience these states often feel isolated. You're not disconnected from others. You're operating at a different frequency. You're sensing a layer of the quantum field most minds filter out to maintain stability. That isolation is not pathology. It's perception expanding faster than language. Here's the question I want you to hold. Don't answer yet. Have you ever felt that moment where everything was the same, but not the same? At the end of this video, I want you to describe that experience in detail, not for validation, but to recognize each other. This isn't about metrics. It's about building a signal among people who've touched the same edge of reality. Because once you understand what those studies were really pointing toward, this story stops being abstract. And that's where it gets stranger. What the CIA analysts brushed against becomes unavoidable when you follow the science far enough. On April 30th, 1957, physicist Hugh Everett III submitted his doctoral thesis at Princeton University, proposing something radical: the wave function never collapses. His mathematics showed that all possible outcomes continue to exist simultaneously, branching into non-interacting realities. This later became known as the many worlds interpretation. Everett wasn't rejected for bad math. He was dismissed because the implications were unbearable. If his equations were correct, reality was not singular, and consciousness was not just observing it. It was embedded within the quantum field itself. Experiments kept piling up. The double-slit experiment, repeated endlessly since the 1960s, showed particles behaving differently depending on whether they were observed. Later work on quantum entanglement demonstrated that particles remain connected across distance instantly, violating classical ideas of space and time. Measurement changed outcomes. Observation altered energy distributions. Perception mattered. That's not mysticism. That's physics. Now connect this to your life. Those moments of déjà vu. The synchronicities that feel engineered. The memories that don't fit the timeline you're supposed to be living. If reality is built from probabilities, then your subconscious mind may be navigating outcomes long before your conscious awareness catches up. That's why regret feels physical. Why certain choices feel like losses from another life. Why spiritual awakening often feels like grief mixed with expansion. Your vibration shifts, your frequency changes, and suddenly the old narrative no longer holds. In 1931, Max Planck, Nobel Prize winner and father of quantum theory, said, "I regard consciousness as fundamental. Matter is derivative from consciousness." He admitted this openly. But they don't teach that in school. Because if consciousness is primary, then reality creation is participatory, not mechanical. Control becomes harder, and authority becomes fragile. So here's your invitation. In the comments, describe the moment you first felt reality diverge. Be specific. This isn't engagement. It's recognition. Because once you see how deep this goes, this is where everything changes. People who move through these experiences tend to report the same internal signals, no matter their background or beliefs. Intense déjà vu that feels layered, not vague. Emotional detachment from old relationships that once defined them. The unsettling sensation of watching life instead of fully inhabiting it. A sudden, quiet questioning of identity, as if the person you used to be no longer fits the environment you're standing in. These aren't signs of instability. They're signs of a mind trying to reorganize its internal model of reality. When the subconscious mind can no longer reconcile perception with expectation, the world feels fractured. And when no framework exists to explain that fracture, fear fills the gap. In 1983, neuroscientist Benjamin Libet conducted a now famous experiment at the University of California, San Francisco. Using EEG measurements, Libet discovered that the brain initiates actions milliseconds before a person becomes consciously aware of deciding. The results shocked the scientific community. Conscious awareness appeared after the process had already begun. Perception lagged behind reality creation. This wasn't philosophy. It was data. And it raised a disturbing question. If consciousness isn't where decisions start, then where does our sense of agency actually come from? Now connect this to quantum physics. At the quantum field level, events don't unfold linearly. They exist as probability distributions until interaction locks them in. The observer effect shows that perception alters outcomes. Entanglement proves that information transcends distance. If reality itself is relational, then moments of spiritual awakening may feel like system updates, your internal frequency shifting faster than your external environment can mirror. That mismatch creates isolation. You're not broken. You're operating on a different vibration within the same hidden reality. Nobel Prize-winning physicist Eugene Wigner once admitted it was not possible to formulate the laws of quantum mechanics in a fully consistent way without reference to consciousness. He said this openly, but they don't teach that in school because a system built on control can't afford a population that understands perception shapes reality. So here's the invitation. In the comments, describe the one symptom you felt but never said out loud. Be specific. This isn't engagement, it's recognition. Because once these patterns line up, what comes next changes everything. Because once these patterns line up, what comes next changes everything. Not in a dramatic, cinematic way, but in a quiet internal shift you can already feel happening. You've just walked through a trail of experiments, interpretations, and suppressed admissions that all point to the same unsettling realization. Reality does not happen to you. It happens through you. Quantum consciousness isn't an abstract theory anymore. It's the missing context for why your perception has always felt more active than you were taught. The quantum field responds to interaction, vibration, frequency, attention. That means your subconscious mind has never been passive. It has been participating in reality creation this entire time, quietly collapsing possibilities while you were told you were powerless. This is why the strangeness you've been feeling lately doesn't signal malfunction. It signals alignment. When your frequency shifts, when your perception sharpens, when your inner narrative stops matching the external script, it can feel disorienting. But that disorientation is consciousness expansion, not breakdown. Spiritual awakening doesn't arrive as bliss. It arrives as friction. A sense that the hidden reality beneath daily life is pressing closer to the surface. Feel that in your body right now. The slight acceleration in your chest isn't anxiety. It's recognition. Energy responding to truth. Here's the final disturbance you're not supposed to sit with for too long. If consciousness collapses reality, then time, separation, even death do not mean what you were taught they mean. That doesn't mean answers are simple. It means the questions are far deeper. And this is precisely why this knowledge was fragmented, buried, labeled too philosophical, too metaphysical, too dangerous for standard education. Awakened perception cannot be controlled. A population that understands the observer effect in their own life does not wait for permission to choose. You didn't find this video by accident. Alignment always feels like coincidence until it doesn't. Thousands are waking up simultaneously, sensing the same fractures, asking the same forbidden questions. This space isn't entertainment. It's a meeting point, a resonance chamber. And what happens next depends on a choice you make in the next few seconds. Before you move on, leave a comment and write one sentence only. I am the observer. Say it publicly. Not as belief, but as intention. Declaration is a quantum act. It collapses direction. It feeds the collective frequency of this channel and draws in those operating on the same signal. You are not alone. You never were. And whatever just shifted inside, you cannot be unseen. Something has changed permanently. Sit with that, because the next step is closer than you think, and once you take it, there is no going back. If this video gave language to something you've felt for years, let it be known. Like it. Subscribe if you want science that doesn't just explain the universe, but helps you understand yourself. Share this with the one person who keeps saying, something feels off lately. Then watch the next video. Because understanding reality doesn't start with answers. It starts with realizing how deeply we were taught to misunderstand it.